It was one of those evenings that felt almost too perfect to be real. The city lights shimmered across the tall glass buildings, and the soft hum of traffic below mixed with the distant laughter of people dressed in fine clothes. Inside the Grand Marlowe Hotel, one of the most prestigious places in downtown Chicago, a celebration was in full swing. The air smelled of expensive perfume, polished wood, and freshly poured champagne. Every year, the hotel hosted a grand event to honor its employees, partners, and a few of the city's most successful business personalities. Tonight was no different. The ballroom glowed in warm light, and the guests moved gracefully from one end of the room to the other, laughing, shaking hands, and pretending not to notice the cameras flashing nearby. Among the servers moving around quietly, making sure every guest had what they needed, was a young man named Ethan. He was in his early 30s, tall and well-groomed, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform with a golden badge that read concierge. His calm smile never faded as he greeted guests and helped them find their seats. He had a quiet kind of charm, the kind that didn't ask for attention but earned it anyway. Most of the staff knew Ethan as a polite, reliable man who worked hard and never complained. But very few knew what went on behind that calm face, that he once dreamed of becoming a musician. Long before he started working in hotels, Ethan had spent countless hours sitting at an old piano in his parents' living room, teaching himself melodies from scratch. He used to imagine playing in grand concert halls or recording his own music someday. But dreams can be fragile. Life doesn't always bend to your will. When his father fell ill, Ethan had to put everything aside. He took the first job he could find to help his family, and over time the dream faded quietly into the background. The piano became something he admired from a distance, like a friend he no longer had time to visit. The event that night wasn't supposed to be anything special for him, just another shift, another evening of smiles and service. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Near the center of the ballroom stood a grand piano, glossy black, perfectly tuned, and purely decorative for the night. Most people walked past it without much thought, though a few older guests admired it with nostalgic smiles. Ethan had noticed it as soon as he entered the room earlier that day. Even as he worked, his eyes kept drifting toward it. He could almost feel the weight of the keys beneath his fingers. And then, she arrived. Clara Whitmore was the kind of person who caught everyone's attention the moment she walked into a room. She wasn't loud or overbearing, but her confidence had a quiet power that drew eyes toward her. In her late 20s, she had already made a name for herself as one of the youngest millionaires in the city and a tech entrepreneur, known for her creativity and sharp wit. People often said she could turn any conversation into an adventure. Tonight she looked radiant in a simple white dress that shimmered under the golden lights. Her laughter was bright, the kind that made people want to join in even if they didn't know the joke. As she mingled with other guests, Ethan passed by with a tray of drinks. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She smiled politely and he nodded back with his usual professional calm. It was just a passing moment, but it lingered with him longer than it should have. Later in the evening, when the speeches were over and the music from the live band started to fade, a few guests gathered near the piano. Clara was among them, chatting animatedly with some of the hotel's executives. The conversation turned lighthearted, filled with jokes and teasing. Someone mentioned how nobody had touched the piano all evening. "I wonder if anyone here can actually play," one of them said. Clara laughed and tapped the piano lid lightly with her glass. "Maybe I should make things interesting," she said playfully. "Play that piano and I'll go out with you." Her words were meant as a joke, a silly challenge tossed into the air with no real intention behind it. The small group laughed, some pretending to take her seriously for fun. "Oh, come on," another guest said. "You'll have every guy here trying to play something now." Clara grinned. "Good. I could use some entertainment." Ethan, who had just walked by with an empty tray, heard every word. He paused for a second, unsure whether to laugh or just keep walking. The other staff around him chuckled softly. One of the waiters leaned closer and whispered, "You could play, right? I've seen you near the piano before." Ethan smiled faintly and shook his head. "Not tonight," he said quietly. But as he moved toward the service area, something inside him stirred. It wasn't about the date or even about impressing anyone. It was the piano, the chance to play again. The idea stuck in his mind like a melody he couldn't shake. For the next 20 minutes, he tried to focus on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting. He remembered his old piano, the smell of the wood, the way his mother used to hum along when he played. He remembered how alive he used to feel when his fingers moved across the keys. Finally, he stopped pretending to ignore it. He set down his tray, took a quiet breath, and looked across the room at the piano once more. One of his colleagues noticed the look on his face. "You're thinking about doing it, aren't you?" she asked with a teasing smile. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Maybe just for a minute." "Go on," she said. "What's the worst that can happen?" He smiled. "I get fired," she laughed. "Trust me, if you play well, no one's firing you tonight." So with his heart pounding quietly in his chest, Ethan walked toward the piano. The sound of chatter and laughter filled the room, but as he approached, it all seemed to fade into the background. People noticed him, some curious, others confused. It wasn't often that a staff member stepped into the spotlight. Clara looked up, surprised, when she realized who was walking toward the piano. "Wait," she said with a light laugh. "You're not serious, are you?" Ethan smiled, polite as ever. "Just thought I'd take up the challenge, ma'am." Her friends laughed. "Looks like you've got yourself a brave one, Clara." She tilted her head, amused. "All right, then. Let's see what you've got." Ethan took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. The seat felt familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. His fingers hovered above the keys, unsure where to begin. The room had gone quieter than he expected. People were watching, waiting. Even the waitstaff peeked from the sides, whispering to each other. He closed his eyes for a moment and let his hands find a chord, soft and hesitant at first. Then another, smoother this time. The sound was pure, rich, and warm. The conversation in the background slowly died down as his playing began to fill the space. He started with something simple, a gentle melody he remembered from his younger days. His fingers found their rhythm easily, as though they had been waiting for this moment all along. The music grew stronger, flowing naturally, carrying emotion with every note. Clara watched, her playful smile slowly fading into something softer. It wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't just someone playing to show off. It was someone pouring a piece of his soul into the music. For Ethan, time disappeared. The room, the people, the lights, all of it blurred until only the sound remained. He felt the familiar surge of emotion that came whenever he played, the feeling he'd missed for so long. When he finally hit the last note, it lingered beautifully in the air, echoing across the quiet ballroom. Then came the applause. It started softly, then grew louder and louder until the entire room was clapping. Guests stood, some even whistling, others smiling in awe. Ethan looked up, a little stunned, unsure how to react. Clara was clapping too, her eyes wide and bright. "Wow," she said softly. "I didn't see that coming." Ethan smiled a little shyly and stood up. "Just an old song," he said quietly. "An old song," she repeated with a smile. "You just made the whole room stop breathing for 3 minutes." Her friends laughed and teased her, but she didn't seem to hear them. She walked up to him, extended her hand, and said, "Well, a deal's a deal." Ethan hesitated, half expecting her to laugh it off, but she didn't. There was something genuine in her expression, something warm. He shook her hand lightly. "I think I'll settle for the applause," he said with a modest grin. She smiled, tilting her head. "You might not get out of this that easily." The laughter returned. The music from the speakers started again, and the crowd slowly drifted back into conversation. But something had changed in the room. People looked at Ethan differently now, not just as a staff member, but as someone who had, for a brief moment, made the night unforgettable. As he returned to his post, his coworkers patted him on the back, grinning. "You just became a legend, man," one of them said. Ethan laughed softly. "I just played a song," but deep down he knew it was more than that. For the first time in years, he had felt like himself again. The version of him that believed in music, in moments, in the kind of magic that happens when you follow a feeling. And across the room, Clara kept glancing his way, still smiling to herself as if trying to understand what had just happened. That night wasn't just a fancy event anymore. It was the beginning of something neither of them could quite name yet, something that would change both their lives in ways they never expected. The night after the gala, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. The memory of the applause still echoed faintly in his mind, and he couldn't help smiling as he got ready for another workday. He wasn't used to being noticed. Normally, people passed by him without remembering his face, but last night had been different. For a brief moment, the quiet hotel worker had become the center of attention. He made himself a cup of coffee, looking out of the small window of his apartment. The sky was still gray, but the city was already waking up. He thought about the grand piano, about how his fingers had felt alive again. He hadn't planned to play that night, but something inside him just couldn't resist. He could still see Clara's face in his mind, that surprised smile when he finished playing. It wasn't just a polite reaction. There had been real emotion there, the kind you can't fake. He didn't think much would come of it, though. People like her lived in a different world, one filled with luxury, business meetings, and choices most people never had the chance to make. He was just a hotel concierge. Their worlds had only crossed because of a joke. By the time Ethan arrived at work, the hotel was buzzing with stories about the night before. Every department seemed to know about the piano moment. "Hey, maestro," one of the bellmen called out, grinning as Ethan walked in. "Morning," Ethan said with a small laugh, shaking his head. "Don't start." "Too late," another voice said from behind him. "You're famous now. Everyone's talking about it. The woman you played for, she's that millionaire, right?" Ethan gave a modest shrug. It was just a bit of fun. Nothing serious. But even as he said that, part of him felt the truth was a little deeper. It hadn't felt like just fun when he played. It felt real. Throughout the morning, guests came and went, and the day moved on like any other. Still, every now and then, someone would stop him to say they'd heard about his piano performance. One guest even asked if he was planning to play again sometime. Ethan smiled politely but didn't make any promises. By noon, he had finally managed to escape to the staff lounge for a short break. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window again. The sound of rain tapping against the glass filled the silence. He didn't hear her at first. "Mind if I sit here?" Ethan looked up and nearly dropped his cup. It was Clara. She was standing there in a cream-colored coat, her hair slightly damp from the rain, holding a small umbrella in one hand. For a second, he couldn't find any words. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, finally, standing a little too quickly. "Of course. Please have a seat," she smiled. "You can just call me Clara. We're not at a board meeting." He hesitated but nodded. "All right, Clara." She sat down, setting her umbrella beside her. "I hope I'm not interrupting your break." "Not at all," he said. "I just wasn't expecting—" "Well, she laughed softly. "I get that a lot. I came by to drop something off for one of the hotel managers, but then I thought, why not say hello to the man who managed to stop an entire ballroom with a piano?" He smiled, embarrassed. "It wasn't that dramatic." "Oh, it was," she said, resting her chin on her hand. "You have no idea how rare it is to see something genuine at those events. Everyone's so busy trying to impress each other that they forget how to feel. But when you played, it was like the whole room remembered what emotion was." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. "That's kind of you to say. It's been a long time since I played for anyone." "Why'd you stop?" she asked. He hesitated. "Life," he said simply. "My father got sick. I had to work, help my family. Music didn't pay the bills." Clara nodded slowly, her expression softening. "That's a hard choice," he smiled faintly. "It wasn't really a choice. But I don't regret it. He got to hear me play for years before things changed. That's enough." There was a pause between them. The rain outside grew heavier, the drops racing down the glass like moving threads of silver. "You know," Clara said after a moment, "you still play like someone who loves it. You can't fake that." Ethan looked down at his cup, a little shy. "Maybe. I guess it never leaves you completely." "It shouldn't," she said. "Talent like that shouldn't sit in a back room while you hand out room keys." He laughed quietly. "I don't think the world is waiting for another hotel pianist." "Maybe not," she said, smiling. "But sometimes the world doesn't know what it's waiting for until someone shows them." They both laughed, and the moment lightened again. Before leaving, Clara reached into her bag and handed him a small card. "Here," she said. "This is my assistant's number. Call sometime. I'd love to hear you play again, maybe without a ballroom full of people this time." Ethan blinked, taken off guard. "You're serious?" "Completely," she said. "And I don't make fake offers." He looked at the card in his hand, unsure what to say. "All right," he said quietly. "Maybe I will." She smiled and stood. "Good." I'll hold you to that." Then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and a quiet that suddenly felt heavier than before. Ethan sat there for a long time staring at the card. He wasn't used to people like her showing interest in someone like him. The next few days went by slowly. Ethan kept the card tucked safely in his wallet, though he wasn't sure if he'd ever use it. Every time he thought about calling, something inside him hesitated. Maybe she had just been being polite. Maybe she'd already forgotten. But one evening, as he was closing up the concierge desk, he saw something unexpected. A small envelope sat on the counter with his name on it. Inside was a note, short, written in neat handwriting. "Still waiting to hear you play again. Clara." Below it was an address. Ethan laughed under his breath, shaking his head. She wasn't kidding. The next day was his day off. He spent most of the morning pacing around his apartment, debating whether to go. Part of him wanted to stay home. It all felt too strange, too unreal. But another part of him, the part that had sat at that piano and felt alive again, kept whispering that he should go. By late afternoon, he found himself standing in front of a modern glass building on the north side of the city. The address matched the note. Inside, a receptionist greeted him kindly and directed him to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, he found himself in a bright, spacious room filled with books, plants, and, right in the center, another grand piano. Clara was there, sitting casually on the edge of a desk, scrolling through her tablet. She looked up when she heard him. "You came," she said, smiling. "I was starting to think you wouldn't." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Wasn't sure if you meant it." She laughed softly. "I always mean it. Come in." He stepped inside, still a little unsure. The view from the tall windows showed the entire city below, the sunlight bouncing off the river. It was beautiful, quiet but full of life. "I hope you don't mind the setup," she said. "I keep that piano here for when I need to think. Music helps me clear my head, though I can't play nearly as well as you." He smiled. "It's a beautiful instrument." "Then play something," she said simply. "No audience, no pressure. Just us." Ethan sat down and took a slow breath. The room was silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. His fingers touched the keys gently and he began to play, a soft, slow tune that drifted through the air like a whisper. Clara closed her eyes, listening. It was different from the gala. There was no noise, no applause, no crowd. Just the music, calm, pure, alive. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then she opened her eyes and said quietly, "You make everything stop when you play. It's like the world just listens." He smiled shyly. "It's just something I do when I need to breathe." She nodded slowly. "Then keep doing it." They talked for hours after that, about work, family, dreams, regrets, and the small things that make life worth living. The more they spoke, the less it felt like Millionaire and concierge, and more like two people who simply understood each other. When he finally stood to leave, Clara said, "You know, I wasn't joking that night." "About what?" he asked, smiling. "Play that piano and I'll go out with you. Remember?" He laughed, shaking his head. "I thought that was just part of the moment." "Maybe," she said. "But maybe it was also a promise." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just smiled. "We'll see where the music goes." As he walked out into the fading evening light, Ethan realized something had changed. The world didn't feel as small as it used to. The walls he had built around himself were starting to fall away, one note at a time, and somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The week after Ethan visited Clara's office felt strangely different. He still worked the same hours, wore the same uniform, greeted guests with the same polite smile. But inside, something had shifted. There was a kind of lightness in his steps that hadn't been there before, a quiet spark that came from remembering what music felt like again. He caught himself humming while arranging brochures at the desk, or tapping gentle rhythms on the counter when no one was looking. Even his co-workers noticed. "You've been smiling more lately," said one of the front desk clerks. "Something good happen?" Ethan only shrugged. "Just good days, I guess." He didn't mention Clara, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he wasn't sure what to call it yet. They weren't friends exactly. Not in the ordinary sense, but they weren't strangers anymore either. After that quiet afternoon in her office, she had started texting him now and then, small things at first, found a new jazz playlist. "You'd like it," Do you ever play classical? Or just from the heart? Coffee tomorrow? My treat. Her messages were short but always warm. Ethan replied carefully, always polite, always thankful. But each conversation made him smile a little more. He wasn't used to being seen, really seen, by someone like her. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, she stopped by the hotel again. She wasn't dressed in her usual sharp business clothes this time. She wore a plain sweater, jeans, and a soft gray scarf. Still, even in her simplest outfit, she carried herself with the same quiet confidence that always turned heads. Ethan was helping a guest check out when he noticed her standing by the lobby entrance. Their eyes met, and she smiled. He finished quickly and walked over. Back so soon? He asked. Couldn't stay away, she said playfully. Actually, I had a meeting nearby and thought I'd stop for some coffee. You free for 10 minutes? He glanced at the clock. 10 I can do. They sat at one of the small tables near the lounge, the soft sound of piano music playing from the hotel speakers. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She looked around. You ever get tired of this place? He thought about it. Sometimes. But it's peaceful. Every day is a little different. People come and go. I like that part. She nodded. You ever think of leaving? Doing something else? He smiled faintly. Every once in a while. But it's not that simple. Clara leaned forward, her elbows on the table. You know, I've been thinking about something. My company's hosting a charity event next month. Smaller than the gala, more private. I want it to feel real this time, not just another fancy dinner. Would you maybe play there? He froze. Me? She nodded. Yes, you. You'd be perfect. I'm not a professional anymore, he said quickly. I haven't performed in years. That night at the gala was just the best part of the evening, she finished for him. Don't overthink it. I'll take care of everything. Just say yes. Ethan hesitated. The idea scared him a little. Performing again in front of strangers, in a formal setting, felt like stepping into a dream he'd already let go of once. I don't know if I can, he said quietly. You can, she said, her tone gentle but firm. And I think you should. The way she said it made him believe it, even if only for a moment. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll think about it. That's good enough for now, she said with a smile. After she left, he sat at the table for a while, just staring at his reflection in the coffee cup. He remembered the first time he'd ever played for people. A high school recital where his hands shook the entire time, but his heart felt alive. He remembered his father's proud smile that day, and then he remembered all the years that followed, the missed chances, the quiet nights when he sat alone wishing he could start again. Maybe this was his chance. That evening, when his shift ended, Ethan went straight home and uncovered his old keyboard from the corner of his apartment. Dust had gathered on it, but it still worked. He plugged it in, sat down, and pressed a few keys. The sound was faint compared to the grand pianos he'd played, but it was enough. At first, his fingers were stiff. He stumbled over notes he used to play easily, but slowly, the rhythm returned. He closed his eyes and let the music come back to him. The feeling, the connection, the freedom. Hours passed without him noticing. By midnight, he was smiling again. His neighbors probably didn't appreciate the late-night practice, but for the first time in years, he didn't care. He felt like himself again. The next morning, he texted Clara, "If that offer's still open, I'll play." Her reply came a minute later. "I knew you'd say yes." From that day on, they started meeting more often. Sometimes she'd invite him to her office to play, just for her and a few close friends. Other times, they'd grab coffee and talk for hours about life, family, and music. He learned that she had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Her success hadn't come easy. She had built her company from scratch, starting with just an idea and a borrowed laptop. "You ever wonder if you're chasing the right dream?" Ethan asked her once. "All the time," she said. "But then I remind myself that there's no perfect dream. You just chase the one that makes you feel alive." He smiled. "That's a good way to see it." "And what about you?" she asked. "What makes you feel alive?" He thought about it for a while, then said, "When I play. When the world gets quiet and it's just the music. That's when I feel like I belong somewhere. She nodded. Then that's what you should hold on to. The more time they spent together, the easier their conversations became. There was no pretending, no showing off. They talked about everything. Fears, mistakes, even silly little things like favorite foods and songs from childhood. And somewhere in those moments, a quiet connection began to grow. It wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was simple. Two people from different worlds finding comfort in each other's company. As the charity event drew closer, Ethan started to prepare seriously. Clara arranged for him to use a practice room at the hotel, away from the noise of guests. He spent his breaks there, fingers moving across the keys, rediscovering melodies he'd forgotten. Sometimes Clara would stop by and listen, sitting quietly near the piano with her eyes closed. She never interrupted, never offered advice, she just listened, and somehow, that made him play even better. The night before the event, Clara called him. "You ready?" she asked. "Almost," he said, smiling. "Just trying not to overthink it." "You'll be fine," she said. "Trust me. Just play like you did that first night. Play like no one's watching." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's easier said than done." "Maybe, but you've already done it once. You can do it again." When the day finally arrived, the venue was set up beautifully, elegant but warm, just as Clara had promised. Soft lights, small round tables, and a stage with a polished grand piano at its center. The event wasn't huge, maybe 50 guests, but it was enough to make Ethan's palms sweat as he waited. Backstage, Clara came to check on him before it began. "You look nervous," she said gently. "I am," he admitted. "It's been a long time since I've done anything like this." She smiled and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You'll be amazing. Just breathe." He nodded, taking a slow breath. When his name was announced, he stepped onto the small stage. The lights were bright, the faces in the audience soft and expectant. He sat at the piano, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. At first, the sound felt distant, like his body was moving, but his mind hadn't caught up. But as the music flowed, something shifted. He stopped worrying about the people watching. The room faded and only the music remained, calm, emotional, alive. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause, warm, heartfelt, real. He looked up and saw Clara in the crowd, smiling proudly. After the performance, guests came up to thank him, to tell him how much they loved it. Someone even asked if he had an album, which made him laugh. When the crowd finally thinned, Clara walked over. "You were incredible," she said. "Thank you," he replied, still a little dazed. "I almost walked out before it started." "I'm glad you didn't," she said softly. "You belong there, behind those keys." He looked at her, grateful. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true," she said. "And maybe someday you'll believe it." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the faint hum of music and laughter from the other room. Something about the moment felt heavier, more meaningful. But neither of them rushed it. They just let the silence stretch comfortably between them. As the night ended, Ethan walked out into the cool evening air. The city lights sparkled above, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving towards something, not running away from it. He didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but for once he didn't need to. It was enough to know that he was finally playing again, and somewhere in that journey, Clara had become more than just the woman who challenged him to play. She had become a reason to keep playing. After the charity event, life didn't return to normal, not for Ethan, and not for Clara either. Something about that night had changed the way they both saw the world around them. For Ethan, it was the moment he realized that music wasn't something he had left behind. It was still a part of who he was. For Clara, it was the first time in a long while she felt that success didn't have to come from numbers or awards, but from something genuine, something human. The morning after, Ethan was back at work as usual, but this time, people treated him differently. Guests recognized him, co-workers smiled wider, and even his manager made a rare comment. "Heard about your performance last night," his manager said. "You represented the hotel well. Nicely done." "Thank you," Ethan said, smiling politely. He didn't think much of it, but inside, he was glowing. He had played again, and not just for himself, But for others, he hadn't felt that kind of joy in years. Later that afternoon, as he was arranging some travel plans for a guest, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara. "You free tonight? I have an idea." Ethan stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Depends on what kind of idea." Her reply came seconds later. "The good kind. Meet me at the old theater on 9th Avenue at 7. That made him pause. The old theater had been closed for years. It used to host live music and plays. But after new developments took over, it was left behind. A forgotten place in the middle of a busy city. He wasn't sure what she wanted there, but he trusted her enough to find out. When he arrived that evening, the sky was turning orange, and the streets were slowly emptying. The theater looked just as he remembered, faded posters still clinging to the brick walls, the once bright marquee letters missing half their bulbs. But through the old glass doors, a soft light glowed. He stepped inside and found Clara near the stage, wearing a long coat and holding a flashlight. The place was dusty but beautiful, even in its silence. "You came," she said, smiling. "Of course," he replied. "What's this about?" She walked closer, the sound of her boots echoing softly in the empty space. "I used to come here when I was a kid," she said. "My mom couldn't afford concerts, so we'd sneak in sometimes and just listen from the back. It always felt magical." Ethan looked around, the old wooden seats creaking as he stepped forward. "It still does," he said quietly. She turned the flashlight toward the stage. There, under a thin sheet, stood an upright piano, worn, but still standing proud. "I had it brought here this morning," she said. "It's not much, but it still works. I thought maybe you could give this place some sound again, even for a little while." Ethan laughed softly in disbelief. "You really went through all that trouble?" She shrugged, smiling. "Trouble's a strong word. Call it a small project." He walked to the piano, brushed the dust off the keys, and sat down. The air smelled faintly of old wood and rain seeping through the cracks in the roof. When he pressed the first key, the sound was rough, uneven, slightly out of tune, but still alive. Clara sat in one of the front rows, her hands clasped under her chin. "Play something," she said softly. Ethan nodded and began to play. The melody wasn't one he'd prepared. It came from somewhere deep inside, a slow, hopeful tune that seemed to fit the room's quiet beauty. The sound filled the empty space, bouncing off the walls, breathing life back into the theater. As he played, Clara closed her eyes and listened. For those few minutes, the world outside didn't matter. There was no noise, no rush, no expectations, and just the music and the stillness. When the song ended, the silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Then she stood up and said softly, "You just brought this place back to life." Ethan smiled. "You did. I just played the notes," she shook her head. "No, you made it feel like home again." They sat there for a while, talking in the dim light. Clara told him she was thinking of buying the theater and restoring it, not as a business move, but as a place for artists to perform freely, a space where people could play, paint, or sing without pressure or judgment. "What if we turned it into something like that?" she asked. "A creative space. You could help run it, music workshops, open nights, anything. What do you think?" Ethan blinked. "You mean, work with you?" She smiled. "Why not? You have the passion, I have the resources. Together, maybe we could make something real." He didn't know what to say. The idea sounded too big, too incredible. But when he looked at her, he realized she wasn't joking. She meant every word. "I'd need time to think," he said finally. "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." They sat in silence again, the sound of raindrops on the roof echoing softly. Then she looked at him and said quietly, "You know, when I first joked about that piano at the gala, I never imagined it would lead to this." "Neither did I," he said with a laugh. "I almost didn't even play that night." "Well," she said, smiling, "I'm glad you did." He smiled back, his eyes warm. "Me too." After that night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the idea. Every spare minute at work, his thoughts drifted to that old theater, the way the light hit the broken stage, the sound of the piano filling the emptiness. He imagined what it could become, a place where people could dream again, just like he had. A few days later, he met Clara again at a small cafe. She was sitting by the window, typing on her laptop, but looked up as soon as she saw him. "So?" she asked. "Have you thought about it?" "I have," he said, sitting down. "And I think it's a wonderful idea. If you're serious, I want to help." Her smile widened. "Good, then we're partners." "Just like that?" he asked with a grin. "Just like that," she said. "Though I should warn you, I can be pretty stubborn when I care about something." "I can handle stubborn," he said. "I've worked in hospitality for 10 years. They both laughed. The kind of laughter that came easily now. From that day forward, they began working together. Clara handled the business side, permits, contractors. Funding. Ethan took charge of the creative side, reaching out to musicians, artists, and local performers who might want to be part of the project. Weeks passed quickly, filled with meetings, dusty renovations, and long evenings of planning. The theater slowly began to transform. Fresh paint covered the cracked walls, new lights were installed, and the old piano was tuned until it sang again. They called the project the Harmony House, a name Ethan had suggested one late night when they were both too tired to think straight. During those weeks, their bond grew stronger. They didn't talk about labels or feelings. They didn't need to. It was in the way she smiled when he made her laugh, in the way he looked for her approval after every idea. It was quiet but undeniable. One evening, after another long day of work, they stood outside the theater, watching the lights glow softly through the windows. The city buzzed around them, but for that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "Looks beautiful, doesn't it?" Clara said. "It does," Ethan said. "Hard to believe it's the same place." She turned to him. "We did this," he smiled. "You did most of it." She shook her head. "No, you gave it a soul." For a while they just stood there in silence, both knowing there was more they wanted to say but not rushing to say it. The night breeze carried the faint sound of laughter from down the street. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I think fate has a funny way of bringing the right people together." Ethan looked at her, his voice gentle. "Yeah, sometimes it plays the right tune when you least expect it." She smiled at that, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The lights flickered inside the theater, reflecting in her eyes like tiny stars. They didn't need words then. The silence said enough. The opening night of the Harmony House arrived faster than either Ethan or Clara expected. The city was alive with the quiet buzz of anticipation. Streetlights glimmered along the avenue, and the air smelled faintly of rain and warm asphalt. The theater looked completely different from the first time Ethan had walked through its doors. The walls were freshly painted, the floors polished, the stage glowing under soft, golden light. Inside, a small crowd gathered. Friends, family, and local artists filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and excitement. For the first time, the theater felt alive in a way that went beyond renovations. It felt like a home, a place waiting to welcome dreams. Ethan arrived early, carrying his music sheets and quietly setting up the piano. His heart raced, not from nerves exactly, but from the energy of the moment. This was more than a performance. This was proof that something beautiful could grow from patience, persistence, and a little courage. Clara arrived moments later, dressed simply in a navy coat and scarf. She moved through the room with ease, greeting guests, checking the sound system, and occasionally glancing at Ethan with a quiet smile that said, "You've got this." "You ready?" she asked when she came behind him. Ethan nodded, though he could feel the faint tremor in his fingers. "I think so." "You will be," she said softly. "Just play like you always do. Nothing else matters." He closed his eyes, pressed the first key, and felt the familiar vibration travel up his arms. The audience faded, the light softened, and for a few moments it was just him and the piano. The first melody flowed slowly, carefully, almost like a whisper in the quiet theater. Then it grew, becoming richer, fuller, carrying emotion with every note. Ethan felt alive in a way he hadn't for years, as though the music wasn't just for the audience, but for himself and Clara and everyone who had believed in him. Clara watched from her seat in the front row, leaning slightly forward. Her eyes were bright, reflecting both the stage lights and a deep pride she didn't try to hide. When Ethan finished the first piece, a hush fell over the room. It wasn't silence of disinterest. It was a silence that held awe, respect, and something almost sacred. Then the audience began to clap softly, hesitantly at first and gradually louder until the room echoed with genuine applause. He smiled faintly, standing to acknowledge them. His heart was pounding, but it was a happy, full kind of pounding, not fear or doubt. After the first performance, Clara walked up beside him. "You did it," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied quietly. She shook her head. "You did it yourself. I just gave you the space to shine." The rest of the night moved in a blur. Artists performed, musicians played, dancers swayed, all under the soft golden lights of the Harmony House. But every time Ethan returned to the piano, the room seemed to breathe with him. He could feel the connection, the music touching the audience, bridging the gap between stage and seats and somehow bringing Clara and him closer in a way that went beyond words. During a break, Clara joined him behind the piano. She didn't speak at first. She just watched him tune the instrument, the way his fingers moved over the keys, precise yet tender. "You know," she said softly after a while, "you've changed this place, more than I imagined." Ethan looked at her, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "It's not just me. It's all of us. Everyone who came here, everyone who believed in the idea." Clara smiled. "Maybe, but you were the spark. The reason this place feels alive again." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that didn't need words. Both of them knew something important had grown between them. A trust, a respect, a connection that neither could ignore. As the night went on, Ethan's final piece approached, a song he had written quietly over the past few weeks, inspired by the theater, the city, and Clara. It wasn't complex, but it was heartfelt. The melody was soft at first, building slowly, each note carrying a memory, a hope, a quiet promise. Clara listened with closed eyes, letting the music wash over her. She felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The kind of feeling that comes from witnessing someone truly being themselves, unguarded and honest. When Ethan finished, the silence was immediate, almost tangible. Then the applause erupted louder than ever. Guests rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Ethan stood, humbled, letting the moment sink in. Clara walked to the stage and took his hand. "That was incredible," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. He smiled, looking down at her. "Thank you for letting me do this." She shook her head. "No, thank you for trusting yourself enough to play. You've reminded me, and everyone here, what real passion looks like." After the crowd slowly dispersed, Ethan and Clara stayed behind. The theater was quiet now, except for the faint hum of the city outside. They walked along the rows of seats, taking in the empty space. "You know," Clara said, "I was scared at first. I wasn't sure anyone would care or if this would even work." Ethan smiled. "I think we underestimated the power of people who care." She laughed softly. "Maybe, but it feels like more than that. It feels like we're creating something bigger, not just a theater, but a community. A home for dreams," he nodded. "Exactly. And I want to be a part of it. Every step of the way." For a while they walked in silence, letting the weight of the night settle around them. It was peaceful, but there was an unspoken tension, a quiet awareness that something had shifted between them, that the connection they had couldn't be ignored any longer. Finally, Clara stopped at the center of the stage. She turned to face him. "Ethan," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I didn't just want to bring life back to this theater. I also wanted to spend time with you, really know you, and I think I care about you more than I realized." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had known for weeks that he felt something too, but hearing it aloud made it real. "Clara," he said quietly, stepping closer, "I feel the same way. I've never met anyone like you. You've believed in me when I wasn't sure I deserved it." She smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "And you've reminded me what it means to feel alive again." For a moment, the city outside, the theater, the music, and everything looked faded into silence. They didn't speak, didn't move, just let the moment hold them. Then, almost instinctively, they leaned closer and their hands found each other's. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was quiet, natural, the kind of closeness that comes from trust and shared experiences. A simple acknowledgement that they had found something rare in each other, in the music, in the theater they had built together. Over the next few months, the Harmony House continued to grow. Word spread about the theater, and soon artists from across the city came to perform, teach and create. Ethan led music workshops, helping young musicians find their confidence. Clara hosted events, bringing together people who shared a love for art, community, and creativity. And throughout it all, they were together, supporting, laughing, and dreaming side by side. They didn't need grand gestures or public declarations. The life they were building, the theater and the quiet moments between them were enough. One evening, as the sun set and painted the city in gold, Ethan and Clara sat on the edge of the stage, legs dangling over the side. The theater was quiet, filled only with the scent of polished wood and faint echoes of past music. "You ever think about that night at the gala?" Clara asked softly. "Every day," Ethan replied. "If you hadn't joked about the piano, I probably wouldn't have played. And if I hadn't played, none of this would exist." She leaned against him. "Funny how one small moment can change everything," he smiled. "Yeah, one song, one choice, and suddenly, life feels different," Clara nodded. "I'm glad it did." Ethan looked at her, then back at the theater. "Me too. I never imagined I'd find this and a place to play, a purpose, and you," she smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Neither did I. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The music, the theater, their connection, it all fit together in a way that made sense. And for Ethan and Clara, that was more than enough. The Harmony House wasn't just a theater anymore. It was proof that courage, passion, and a little faith could create something lasting. It was proof that life had a way of rewarding those who dared to play their own song. And as they sat there, watching the sunset and listening to the quiet hum of the city, Ethan and Clara knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning.